Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're delighted to have you here this morning. Welcome to our program on land use lessons from the field, case studies in planning and development. My name is Ashira Astrow. I'm the executive director of the Wilbur F. Breslin Center for Real Estate Studies here at Hofstra Law School. And in today's program, we're going to talk about two recent regional projects that showcase key components in comprehensive planning and land development, planned unit developments. This program is intended to partially fulfill the New York State annual training requirement for municipal planning and zoning officials. CLE credits are also available for attorneys. If you have not already done so, please check in and register at the registration desk to make sure that you get your credits. Is Laura in here? I'm going to wait to thank Laura until she's actually in the room because she deserves a huge thank you. So before we begin, I also want to recognize and thank Brad Schwartz and the firm of Zarin Steinmetz, where Brad is a partner, for organizing and generously supporting today's program. And now I'm delighted to welcome a surprise guest. The Breslin Center was founded almost 20 years ago by Wilbur Breslin, who is a giant in real estate on Long Island. And I'm delighted to have with us today Wilbur's son, Ken Breslin, and grandson, Justin Breslin, who is a alum of this law school and who was president of the Real Estate Law Association when he was here as a student. So I know him quite well as well. So Ken, why don't you come up?
I'm so happy to be back. I graduated in '87, and I had the greatest time of my life here at Hofstra. I want to thank everyone for being here at the center, and just wanted to tell you that this center was an idea of my father, who always struggled with planning, and he was always frustrated that what he thought planners didn't really know enough or have the structure, met the academic structure to make the decisions they were making. And he got together with, I forget who the president of Hofstra at that time was, but they decided to develop this center, which started at the business school and later came to the law school. I was much more comfortable with it here. And it has really been a great use for us. You know, we're active with every planner in every town on Long Island, and very often they mention that they did get their credits here. So it's great. I'm just curious, how many Hofstra students, current students, are here today? And how many are here for their zoning credits? There you go. I love you guys. And I like you students too. But I want to again thank you and ask that you get the word out on the center. You can all get your credits, but you might meet people that will probably help you throughout your careers in places like this. And we can't tell you how much and encouraged we are by how Ashira is running the center. With that, I will say goodbye, and I really miss this auditorium. I took most of my classes right here, or in one of the rooms that was just like this. And I'll tell you a little story if we have a little time. It was day one of contracts, and Professor Resnick, what is he still around? He passed away. He comes in and he puts his books down. This is first day of class. Everyone is dressed up, and he says, "Anybody play tennis?" And my close friend at the time says, "Ooh, I do. And he says, "Good, meet me at the courts tomorrow, 1:00. Okay. Following day comes in, we all come in and we say, "Peter, what's it like playing with Professor Resnick, who was great contracts professor?" Peter says, "Professor Resnick didn't show up." We're all kind of mortified. So Professor Resnick soon thereafter walks in the room and he opens up with, "You know, I was supposed to play tennis with someone here. Who was I supposed to play with?" And now it was just a meek me. And he says, "I didn't show." Peter says, "I know you didn't show." So he says, so sue me. And that was one of my greatest experience at Hofstra. All right, with no more ado, please enjoy the day.
Thank you so much. So Laura's still not here. I'm going to thank her and then I'm going to thank her again. Laura Fetter, who is the program director of the Breslin Center, coordinates every aspect of our programs. Oh, Laura. I don't want to embarrass you, but I'm not exaggerating when I say that not a single program that we do would be possible without her. She coordinates all the logistics. She just does everything. So I really want to thank you and being here. Okay, so we're going to hear today we have one more panelist who is on his way. So I'm going to introduce him now just so we don't have to interrupt kind of as we're going. But Brad Schwartz is a partner at, is a partner at Zarin and Steinmetz. He represents developers, property owners, and municipalities in all aspects of real estate, development, and environmental law. He regularly appears before municipal review boards, advancing zoning and land use applications towards completion, and he works to manage the process. He collaborates with his clients, different consultants on technical issues. He also conducts zoning and environmental due diligence for developers and lenders, and he prepares the documents. He negotiates and prepares easements, declarations, and other real estate instruments and agreements. He also has experience with litigation. Brad litigates land use, real estate, and environmental matters. He's successfully defended municipal approvals and seeker decisions under Article 78 proceedings. And perhaps his most impressive accomplishment, Brad is a beloved adjunct professor here at the law school, where he teaches land use regulation and an environmental law in commercial real estate transactions course. So, Brad, thank you for putting this conference together and for lending your time to us. Also here with us is Patrick Cleary. Patrick is a professional planner with over 40 years of experience in the field of planning. He serves as the principal of Cleary Consulting, which is a professional planning firm. It was established in 1990. It has offices in Northport, New York. The firm offers a full range of planning and environmental services for government and the private sector throughout the New York metropolitan area. Prior to the formation of Cleary Consulting, Mr. Cleary served as a staff planner for communities in Westchester and Long Island, and he also worked for a variety of private consulting firms. Patrick is an accredited member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, and he is also a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey. So welcome. Thank you. We will soon be joined by Commissioner James Rouse. Commissioner Rouse is the Commissioner for Planning and Development in the city of Mount Vernon, New York. Throughout his career, he has directly managed over $300 million in capital development. He has participated in planning initiatives at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level. From 2012 to 2016, he served as the president of the American Planning Association's New York Metro chapter. And he has also taught classes both at Hunter College, and he's done some guest lectures at Columbia and Yale universities. And he's a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. So when he comes in, we can give him a round of applause as well. But without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Brad and Patrick.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Cool, we have a lively crowd, Pat. So, first, Shira and Laura, thank you all and the Breslin family for putting on this conference and hosting us. And Pat and I are super excited to participate this morning. It's a great Friday morning, right? Nets won yesterday. Islanders won last night. I'm a Ranger fan in the crowd, so sorry about that. Excited to be here. We have a great program planned. Shira, thank you for that wonderful intro in the bio. I'm not going to repeat all of that. My takeaway just from listening to you talk about me and Pat is how multidisciplinary the land use practice is. And I think that's going to really come to light during the two projects that we illustrated this morning. We're going to walk through two cases that Pat and I have worked on together on the municipal side. We both represent private parties as well as municipal parties. So these are two projects where we sat on the municipal side of the dais. I mean this genuinely. Please participate, jump in. We have a wealth of knowledge in this room. All the hands that went up for the Hopkins Law students, that's really impressive. Thank you for being here early on Friday. We also have a really nice mix of land use professionals from Long Island. We have attorneys, developers, consultants, board members, agency members. So please jump in, ask questions, disagree with us if you want, right? You don't want to hear us lecture for 2 hours. We don't want to lecture for 2 hours. So let's have a conversation, discussion, and let's see where this takes us. We will moderate, of course, to make sure that we cover all the material and we don't lose total track of time. Let's make this exciting. Let's have some fun.
Great. So Brad, the two projects that we're going to talk to you about this morning have something that's common with respect to both of them. That's why we've selected those. Miss James Rouse.
I introduced you already, so everyone knows who you are.
The two projects we selected are common for a couple of reasons. They both illustrate some fundamental elements in the process that we're all involved with. Number one, they demonstrate how persistence and perseverance can overcome the complexity of the things we deal with on a daily basis. Secondarily, how the planning and development process is embedded in the political environment. That's something that's there, it always is, but that process deals with not only policy, but it's also dealing with process and timing. That's an important element of what we'll talk about this morning as well. It's always important, no matter what you're doing, if you're the developer, if you're the municipality developing an initiative, there must be very clearly established goals and objectives that can stand up to scrutiny. Number one, people suing us for the things we do, but also because these projects take so long, every evolution of an approving agency, of a legislative body, has to understand why the project is meritorious in one way or another. And collaboration across the table with the developer, with your colleagues on boards and so forth is imperative. What collaboration generally means is compromise at the end of the day. So those are the sort of elements that we think are common with respect to these two very different projects, and we'll talk about them now. So the first project we're going to talk about.
Pat, before we move on, right? Yep. So Pat mentioned how long these projects take, and he emphasized the political aspect of land use projects, especially right rezonings that require actions by the legislative body. So I hope most of the law students realize, like, election cycles at the local level are 2 years. So Pat, how do you reconcile a 2-year election cycle at the local level with projects that you just mentioned can span multiple years?
This is the bane of our existence. It really is, because you finally get the mayor, you finally get the board, you finally get the council members up to speed with why a project needs to happen or can happen a particular way. November comes and it's different folks. Typically, those different folks show up because they took a contrary position to the prior mayor or the prior board members. So they're coming in with a negative mindset. That's why clearly established goals, objectives, priorities, that's really critical, so you can then sell the new people with why this is an appropriate thing to do. But I will tell you, all of you that are engaged in this process, time is your worst enemy, because it takes too long to get these things through. If you watch, News 12 in the morning, you see the state commercial for build whatever they're called, whatever they're calling, build it quick or whatever. That's because the process takes too long. It's been recognized by everybody, including the governor, and that needs to be fixed. So time is a problem. So where I was jumping to before Brett so rudely cut me off is that the first project we're talking about is a comprehensive plan. So we're very happy this morning to have James here today, who's going to talk about it in greater detail. But let me just set the stage, and I'll do this for both projects. I don't know if many of you know the city of Mount Vernon, the very tip of Westchester County, adjacent to the Bronx. It's the 8th largest city in New York State, population of about 74,000 folks. It's a very ethnically and racially diverse community, which is a strength in many ways. It's a financially challenged community, which is a weakness in many ways. It's very politically fractious, not unusual, but that's just the nature of the beast. Aging infrastructure, a dense downtown hub, and surprisingly, a lot of very well-defined neighborhoods that surround that downtown. So this is Mount Vernon. You've got 20-story buildings, you have stately homes, you have a downtown. Very interesting community from a planner's perspective, a lot going on across the spectrum of the things we deal with on a regular basis. Just to set the stage, land use map on that side, zoning map on the opposite side. One thing that jumps out to me when you look at the land use map is those purple areas. This is a city that still has an industrial base that's been sort of below the radar for a long time. They've been operating on their own initiative, and the city really hasn't helped that industrial base. Things are changing. So, to set the stage about this plan, it really was methodically developed. So James is going to talk about sort of the history about this, but it had a couple of components that were fundamental to how this plan was going to be put together. It was holistic and long range. All of those interwoven elements of the city were with land use, economy, transportation, housing, environment, all had to be sort of integrated in the way this plan was going to be put together. It was vision driven. James will talk about that. Data and analysis based. So we talked a moment ago about that, the challenge of new mayors coming in and changing viewpoints. When you base the work you're doing in the facts, the data, it's irrefutable. You know, you can stand behind that and say, no, you're that misconception because you Googled something last night is incorrect. Here's the actual data that will refute that position. Policy oriented, you have to have a big picture in order to get to the small issues. And action oriented, you have to have a way to do this stuff that you thought of in the comprehensive plan. So with that, James, can you give us a little bit?
So I'm going to interject. Okay, this is going to happen, right? Just for the students, especially. What is a comprehensive plan? Can we do participation?
Absolutely.
What's a
You can
comprehensive?
call on people, Socratic.
Socratic, right? You don't answer, I'm going to invite you to play tennis. So you get someone's got to raise a hand and answer. What is a comprehensive plan? What are we talking about this for?
But when do you use it, really? Because sometimes villages will use it because they want to recreate the whole downtown, or sometimes it's used because of a specific spot project, right?
Yeah. So recreating a downtown. What's your name?
Matt Farrell.
Hey, Pat, it's Brad. So thank you. So when a municipality wants to reimagine a downtown or a specific neighborhood or the entire municipality, a comp plan is essentially like the blueprint or the framework for that vision. So the municipality would enact a comprehensive plan. It's recommended to continuously update those plans every 5 to 10 years to reflect the current vision of the municipality.
And I'll just jump in, right? All the aspiring attorneys in the room, when a municipality wants to change stuff, change our zoning, it's often considered arbitrary unless it's based in some analysis. And that analysis is typically a comprehensive plan. So if you have a vision to move in a particular direction, because I want to change the zoning in the downtown to create more density or less density, whatever it might be, you need to have that comprehensive plan, whether it's a community-wide comprehensive plan or an area-wide comprehensive plan, to justify the zoning that you would put in place or the action you would put in place. And if you don't do it, all you guys are going to make a lot of money suing that municipality.
No, Pat, thank you. Right. Very a black letter legal principle. Zoning must be in accordance with a comprehensive plan. And we'll get into that a little bit at the end of the comp plan discussion, but I just wanted to set the framework for what we're talking about. And you're right, the comp plan can be targeted to a certain area of the municipality, or it could be more broad. A comp plan doesn't have to be always called a comp plan. Sometimes it's a master plan or a vision report. So if you're analyzing just a certain area of the municipality, you might not call it a comp plan, but it's a planning document that at least studies potential rezoning in a certain area. And then that document provides the framework and the legal justification for zoning that later gets enacted in accordance with that planning document.
And I just want to add one more piece before James speaks, which is whatever the initiative is, whether it's a project initiative that we'll talk about later, a comprehensive planning initiative like we're talking about now, these things require a champion. Somebody has to be sort of in charge of the momentum of these projects. And James is a classic, one of the best James to be here. He's the perfect illustration of a champion who made something happen that was really difficult to do. So finding the champion is a really key element to any of these initiatives.
Thanks, Pat. Can y'all hear me okay?
Is the green light on?
There we go. Better?
Yeah.
All right. How y'all doing this morning? Well, first of all, thank you for your applause. Brad was concerned I wasn't going to make it because I had to get through TSA San Juan Airport last night, and took a few hours, but I did. So, but thank you for having me here. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about what we've done up in Mount Vernon. People are familiar with Mount Vernon. Have been to Mount Vernon. Wow, a few hands. Okay, just Westchester County in general. Have you all been to Westchester? So you have an idea of where we're talking about. I'm just going to go back a little bit to have a illustrative map. So a few more things about the city of Mount Vernon. Um, it was founded twice, first as part of the town of Eastchester and then as its own city in the 1800s. I grew up just south. Is it pointing here? Yeah, just south, like this area, in the Bronx. And, even though I lived very close, I didn't know as much as I thought I knew about Mount Vernon. It's a place with very deep roots, very, very deep roots. My first month, the amount of people who said, my family's been here since 1862. I'm a seventh generation Mount Vernonite, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was nice to hear. It was very proud, but with that comes a lot of parochialism, a lot of deep pride, a lot of we do things a certain way here, and that's how we're going to do it. Mayor Sean Patterson Howard, who is one of those folks whose family's been here since the 1860s, the city's first female mayor, which is is a watershed moment for the city, and the first mayor in over 2 decades to be reelected. And I'm going to touch upon that more later because Pat was talking about having a fractious elected body, some of which were elected every 2 years, can cause some discord and inconsistencies in terms of policy and everything. But Mount Vernon is the second densest community in New York State after New York City. But on paper, it's about 74,000 people. It's probably closer to 85,000, 4.4 square miles in total. That's a lot of folks. That's a lot of folks in a small area. It is the blackest and brownest community north of the Mason-Dixon line. Um, it is a community that has historically, it was built as a city of homes. It was one of the early suburbs of New York City. Back when suburbanization really wasn't a concept, it was like giving folks an opportunity for home ownership. But John Stevens, the person who founded Mount Vernon, it was very rare. There were home ownership opportunities literally for everyone, everybody. That sounds great. But, when you offer opportunity within your boundaries, you don't necessarily offer opportunities everywhere in your boundaries. So very early on, there was a level of both integration and segregation in Mount Vernon. And that was exacerbated by the Metro North Railroad, which runs right here. So the fairly distinct north side and south side for decades. North side was historically white, south side was historically mixed, mostly with Italian immigrants and African Americans for many years. So that created kind of a mindset and stereotyping and certain development patterns as you got to the mid 20th century that became problematic. During after the Depression, World War II, white flight became a thing. you know um, Migration patterns became an issue, and so we started to see some decline in Mount Vernon, both intentional and just through natural um, patterns. That being said, over the years, Mount Vernon has evolved and changed. There were certain things that I learned about Mount Vernon. Historical Portuguese population that's been there since the early 1900s, which was fascinating. Historical Italian population, African American population, both of which have given way to new groups. There's an incoming Brazilian population, a large Hispanic Latino population that's been moving in. And so a lot of the politics have been challenging on that end. There's a lack of acknowledgement of these groups coming in. The power bases that have been long established are being challenged. And so for the last couple of decades, it's been difficult to get through that. Um, so go into that in a second. Mount Vernon's last comprehensive plan was 1968. As Mayor Sharp Passon Howard likes to say, the year I was born. I was not born in 1968, but it was, you know, very long time.
And I think that's a reflection of the diversity of the community. It was hard to gain consensus.
Yeah.
Like, over all those years, people would have, I'd like to develop something like this, but you couldn't get everybody in the same room saying the same thing. That was a challenge.
Yeah.
And that's despite general city law saying to update your comp plan every 5 years, right? So over 50 years, Mount Vernon has not touched its comp plan. Well, James.
But that's not entirely true. But it's not a unique situation. It's not a unique situation that, folks don't update their comprehensive plans every 5 or 10 years. It's not unique that this was a politically fractious situation. What's unique about it is that there were at least 2 attempts to get a comprehensive plan through. The last one was in 2011. And I have a copy of it. A full comprehensive plan was written. Environmental was written up. What happened? An election. What happens with an election? New leadership. What happens with new leadership? I don't like the old leadership. Everything the old leadership was garbage. I'm going to throw everything the old leadership did in the trash. And that's what happened. Didn't go in the trash, went on the shelf because I was able to get a copy of it. But it was unfortunate. It was unfortunate that the political infighting caused so much, discord that there was not opportunity for progress. The fact that every 4 years you had a new mayor is problematic because we just about to get your policies pushed through, just about to get things adopted. Someone else comes in with a different vision. Also, historically, there's been a city council that has not been friendly. And in Mount Vernon's case, in recent history, there's been a comptroller that has not been friendly. The comptroller in Mount Vernon is elected, which is not exclusive, but kind of a rarity. So, what happened back in 2019 was an interesting time in Mount Vernon. We had a big financial crisis. Why? Because our comptroller didn't necessarily, can't prove that she stole money, but hid money in multiple accounts, couldn't access it, and she was elected out. And when they tried to get to the accounts, there's nothing there. They couldn't access it. On top of that, the mayor at the time was led out by Mount Vernon police. And,
The whole bit.
and after that, there were 3 different individuals who claimed that they were mayor. Until Mayor Sean Passon Howard was elected the next year. So, and then COVID hit. So it was an interesting time. It's been an interesting time. I arrived in 2020, beginning to stabilize, but it was really a watershed moment, like when I walked in, because I walked in with 3 new city council members, all of whom had a good relationship with the mayor, all of whom had said, we need a comprehensive plan. Why? Because folks were coming in, taking a look, and I say this, as a city like Mount Vernon, that's opportunity for me. That's opportunity for me to scoop things up, do what I want to do, because look how weak they are. They're going to thank me for coming into this city. And that's historically been the attitude. You have backroom dealings, you have, city in fiscal crisis saying, oh, we need some cash flow. We need some cash flow. So you dangle a little bit, you jump at it and you realize, oh, shoot, did I just grab $250,000? I really could have gotten like 5 million out of that deal. Oops.
And what you're seeing is the developers driving the bus. So they come in with a project and they need 15-story height variances, and they get them because there was no basis to say no. There was no comprehensive vision on the part of the community. So it's interesting, where does the momentum come from for adopting a comprehensive plan? It comes from folks like James, it comes from elected officials, but it's also in reaction to the development community, which is knocking on the door on a community, especially a community of Mount Vernon, which is viewed as right for the picking. 3 Metro North train stations on the center of the community, complete, it's got everything. Location. This is a place that has it all. It's 20 minutes to Grand Central or whatever it is. It's ideal. So developers were realizing weak community. I can take advantage of that. I'm showing up. How do you protect that? Well, a comprehensive plan is a way to protect that.
And just to add in, right, from a zoning perspective, a policy perspective, much better for the legislative body to take control of the comp plan and the zoning and set that vision for the community, rather than the zoning board of appeals on a case-by-case, site-by-site process, granting multiple story variances, large variances, essentially the zoning board rewriting the zoning through virtue of granting variances. And so it was that haphazard approval process and the developers knocking on the door that led again to this comp plan initiative.
So James, I have a question. So developers are showing up, they'd like to build something. You're saying we have to do a comprehensive plan. Many communities will adopt a moratorium to allow the time to adopt a comprehensive. What did the city do?
The city actually, when I walked through the door, said to me, "Hey, we told everyone we're going to have a moratorium on development until this comprehensive plan is done." So I kind of raised an eyebrow. I was like, "Really? Um, do you know what a comprehensive plan is?" It's like, "Yeah." So like, it's you're going to rewrite the zoning. What we heard that takes like what 6 to 8 months. It's like, oh no, no, no. It's comprehensive plan is a holistic and long range process, and it's community driven. Community driven, meaning we have to. It's like, okay, so we already put together, called and listen, a 50 person advisory board. Just go talk to them. They represent the community, and then you'll have a plan. It's like, no. First of all, I have no idea who these 50 people are, and number two, we're going to go into the community and hear their voice, hear their vision, come up with a plan. They're like, well, how long is that going to take? I was like, if we're lucky, 18 months. They're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We can't develop for 18 months. I was like, we could, but I didn't campaign on stop all development until a comprehensive plan is done. And they're just like, oh, this is a problem. I was like, we have a solution for you. You can do it in phases. Our downtown was hit hard by COVID. It really, it's all across the country. It wasn't, doing spectacular in the first place, but the interesting thing about Mount Vernon, this is how I framed it. Is like the purpose of this comprehensive plan was to what's our identity here? Why are we here? Why are we doing this comprehensive plan? Who are we? And I kind of give like I give an example, a graphic of like triangulation, where it's just kind of like the city of Mount Vernon, that's a suburb of New York, function as a typical Westchester Village, our downtown. And so we have a very quaint looking downtown with a lot of vacant storefronts, not a ton, but a visible amount of vacant storefronts. And so, how about this? We've had a lot of inquiries downtown. Why don't we fix it in? So, what we did is we chose a 50-block area. I'll go back. This is our downtown right here. You could see a mix of red and blue for institutional, some housing. We'll focus on that. Actually, you can see right here the downtown business area. So it's like a 50-block area. It's a big enough area to focus on. And why? Number one, we have to get buy-in. We really need a buy-in from the community. I told you, we went through this process before. Failed. Why? Politics. A lot of skepticism there. A lot of skepticism. It's like, so even if you don't shop downtown, when you say you live in Mount Vernon, like most people think of two places, like Sanford Boulevard, which is kind of a local highway which runs east and west, and then downtown. So you want those areas to look, spruced up. It's like, oh, we're right next to Bronxville. We're not right next to Pelham. Nice quaint Westchester, typical Westchester villages. Just like, but Mount Vernon's not reflecting that currently, and so we're getting a lot of inquiries. At least, I walked through the door in the first month, at least a half a dozen people calling me, just saying, "Hey, I have property, we want to do a project. When are you getting this comprehensive plan done?"
Let's put a pin in that portion of it. James, if you could advance 2 slides.
That's because you had a moratorium, correct?
Did not.
Did not officially, it was just policy, but in Mount Vernon, they hold you to your word, even if it's not.
You can expand on moratorium just for the students. I've been through it,
Yeah.
what it is and the length of it.
Moratorium essentially, you can.
Right, essentially.
Yeah.
So, put simply, a moratorium is a lawful tool that municipalities use to stop the submission and processing of land use applications while undergoing a comp plan or rezoning process. It's essentially, let's hit the status quo. If we know we're embarking on this process, let's hit pause. No new applications, no new building permits, while we reimagine our communities and enact new comp plan and new zoning. There are certain exceptions that we don't need to get into now, but suffice to say, it's a pause on development undergoing a comprehensive planning process.
So I want to just give you some context before we talk about this very unusual process of how we separated the downtown, the comprehensive planning effort. So James had brought in a fairly substantial consulting team to help him with the preparation. Our firm was sort of the quarterback of that team. I was the Brady. You were the
Wrong region.
yeah. That's so what we tried to develop was a formal process to start with to get to where we wanted to go. So that required what James started to talk about. So there was an advisory committee, which we'll talk about, which was in this case completely unhelpful, but usually a very helpful component. There was the public engagement process, which was incredibly difficult because of the diversity of this community. James mentioned we didn't speak Portuguese, so how do you reach out to those folks? It was really a challenge. And then there were the stakeholders, the city staff, and the elected officials who have a say in all of this. And the piece to the other side of this, which was James requiring us to take stock of everything. So when someone develops an issue, it's an impact on the schools or whatever it was, if the sewer system can't accommodate this, we had the facts so that we could lay out a position that was based on something that was tangible, measurable. It was a metric that we could defend. So all that sort of went into the core concepts of what the plan would be all about. So we have an approach to how to do this, but we have this pressure that we've got developers waiting to do stuff in the downtown. And we have the city to do the rest of the community as well. So how do we do that? And that's where we separated this. So for all of the lawyers in the room, segmentation is a thing. Bear that in mind when you had your secret courses with respect to this. So we were scared about that potential. How do we sidestep the misstep of segmenting our review of this project? So James, you could talk about how we did that.
Sure. So again, phase one, we focused on the downtown. And it's just kind of like, Pat's
That's just an image of the downtown.
Yeah. Pat's here, he's our lead consultant. Pat didn't do this. Pat wasn't a part of this process. And I'll get to why. So we did what's normal. So we put out a request for proposals, RFP, to have consultants help us. You can do a comprehensive plan in-house, but if you have deep pockets and qualified planners that can roll up their sleeves, willing to work to get this done, do it. Do it. It's fantastic. But especially like Vernon, most municipalities bring in a consultant team who are experts, who focus, who hone in on this.
And it's a time-consuming process.
And so we brought in, we had 4 respondents, 4 serious respondents, I should say. Went through 2 rounds of interviews. First, my department, Planning Community Development, and the mayor. We had our favorite 2. One was, kind of, the golden child who, was expected to be the designated developer, was actually part of my interview process, coming on to Mount Vernon. And then, another consultant team. Get to city council, they interviewed 2, and actually we chose the other team. And both because it was most cost effective, by the other, the chosen one wanted to charge us, 3 or 4 times as more because, he's like, our special sauce. I'm like, you're really just fancy ketchup, but that's okay. So they came in and it was knocked it out of the park. And there were three consultants. there. Our lead consultant dropped the ball. And not dropped the ball, I should say, was getting her firm back on its feet and kind of used us as a springboard. Fortunately, that's what you find with municipalities like Mount Vernon for multiple reasons. In financial crisis, opportunity for need there. Demographics. Let's stereotype. Let's leverage the stigma that a community like Mount Vernon has. Use it as a springboard. So we did not get the attention that we were paying for. And so my team, I have an amazing dedicated staff. You know, a lot of them, cut their teeth with not-for-profits, community organizing, community-based plans. And so we filled in the gap. That is exhausting. Absolutely exhausting. When you're paying over $250,000 to someone and you yourself are doing like $500,000 worth of work, it's exhausting. So we got a copy of this report. We looked at it and we're like, you got to be kidding me. So we cleaned it up. It was a good foundation, but not well written. So we started cleaning it up. And then for Pat and Brad, who are on retainer with the city council, we just spoke with city council and they're like, James, why don't you work with Pat? See if we can clean this up. I'm like, Pat, do you think we can do this? He's like, not a problem. So we cleaned this up. Fantastic report at the end of the day. As I said, it had good bones, but it's just like, good bones don't make a whole body. And so we were able to do that and we were like, what do we do? So we went through another project. We didn't actually go through a full RFP process, but we, did some cold call solicitations and, crafted a very unique skeleton team. It was just like city council, Pat. I brought it up. She's saying, "Hey, I've been speaking with city council. What about Pat? Kind of, he's a New England Patriots example, but I'm a Bills fan, so he was the Josh Allen. So like a skeleton team, and I was just like, okay. I was like, but we have to bolster this. We can't. We were running the department was running the community outreach. We did over 30 outreach events. 30.
James, let's just stay there, right? And just to, I guess, fast forward a little bit. So phase one downtown report, phase one of the overall comp plan process, right? We were able to clean it up. We got something done, even in the face of a consultant not kind of living up to what we thought was going to get accomplished. But we had a council pressuring, right? Election, end of year. We want to get something done. We want to be able to say to the community, we lived up to our election promise. And so they were able to do that. We got phase one done, the downtown report, and then laid the predicate for the rest of the comp plan.
And here's the subtlety with respect to that. So we called this, as you see in the image, the vision report. So it wasn't an adopted plan. That allowed us to skirt the segmentation issue because it wasn't mandating certain improvements or certain zoning changes. It was recommendations. That was critical to us and critical to James's approach because it allowed us to move forward with existing developers who still wanted to do work in the community, didn't want to wait several years if a moratorium was in place. So what we were able to do is say, we have a vision for the downtown area, and if you build a building that's 14 stories in this particular area, we think that works. It was generalized and it was a vision. So those developers were able to file applications and begin the review process that takes, as you all know, many, many months to make its way through the review process. So these were moving parallel, but it allowed us to politically gain credit for doing something that wasn't necessarily a commitment until we finished the next phase when it became the commitment. Sort of a subtle dance there, but it worked.
Rather than the moratorium, right, projects got processed, approved, and started construction while the balance of the comp plan process was going on because the vision report laid that, again, predicate zoning in accordance with the comp plan. But comp plan, for that purposes of the legal principle, doesn't have to be a comp plan. It's any planning document that at least lays the foundation for a community's vision. So this phase one report provided that foundational basis for rezonings and approvals for those other projects while the larger comp plan process got back on track with the new consultant team. James, let's jump to that. And then specifically, We sat in council meetings. One of you mentioned before the large Portuguese speaking community in Mount Vernon. We sat in council meetings where the council said to us, guys, you got to get into the community. We want to go reach those people, go to the churches. We want to get every single segment of our community. We want to hear their voices. We want to know what's important to them and capture their feedback in the comp plan. So Jason, I want to hear about the public outreach effort and give some examples of what you did. And I also want to hear a little bit about your 50-member advisory committee, right? Comp plan committees are a thing. Didn't really work that well in this example. So briefly touch upon both of those. Why the comp plan committee wasn't a high success and what you guys did to reach every facet of the community.
Yeah, first I'll start with the comp plan committee. I said before, 50-person comp plan committee. And you may notice like, okay, that sounds, 80,000 people, 75, 80,000 people. An advisory committee usually consists of anywhere between half a dozen to a dozen. So 15 is considered large. But because you had an elected body who was not familiar with the process, but wanted to make sure that everyone was represented throughout the community, just started, saying, I know this person, I know that person, I know this person. Whether they were actually interested or had the capacity to do so. So most of our meetings would be between 10 and 15 people, which was normal. But it was an inconsistent group of people weaving in. So did we meet with them as often as we should? No. Did we depend on them as often as we should? No. But what we did is like we still need to hear community's voice. So we went out there. We had a great team. As I said, we were doing a lot of the public outreach as a department, but it was exhausting. So we had a 5-firm consultant team, which is a lot. It's a lot. Our outreach team was BRS Incorporated, which focuses, on environmental, but does a lot of outreach, and Creative Urban Alchemy, whose focus is, this kind of work. And we kept 2 members of the original team, AKRF to do the environmental and zoning work, and Hudson Valley Plan for Progress to do economic development, to do housing, and to do, government efficiency. And so that helped us. We were able to, as I mentioned, we did over 30 outreach sessions. Why? Because it was a necessity.
James, where were they held?
Huh?
Where were they held?
They're held primarily in houses of worship. We have over 400. We have 400 churches in 4.4 square miles. 400 churches, which is like, wow, it's a very faithful community. And it's just like, yes, it's also 400 lots that don't pay taxes. So it limits our tax base.
Things that I've noticed on Long Island, is that we've been doing a lot of vision plans on different communities. It's really a good starting point for people have shoes in the room. To start at least developing, some consensus on where a community wants to go.
Yeah, so
It's something
I
that's been very effective.
I think it's imperative. It's James's secret sauce is the issue. So in this case, it was a group of folks that were politically appointed that didn't have the best interests of the initiative at heart. That's the key. So stakeholder groups are stakeholders by and large, imperative to the process, but you've got to be careful on who you put on those committees. And oftentimes it's just a political hack who's selected to be on the committee because he's the brother-in-law of the mayor, whatever it is.
Right.
That was the problem in Mount Vernon, how to sift that through. And the problem in Mount Vernon was it's such a big committee, nobody bothered to show up at the meetings. And when the plan was adopted, the naysayers of the committee said, I wasn't involved in this. You didn't listen to my voice because she didn't participate in the process. So it's while I completely agree with it's imperative, but it's a really tricky animal to manage effectively to get out of it, what you need to get out of it.
So quickly, just in terms of our outreach process, we took 2 tracks. First is geography based. We can't go to every single corner of Mount Vernon. We tried to hit every major, neighborhood. And we tried to do it at least twice because if you didn't have an opportunity the first time, now you have another chance. It was also cohort based. First we did, industry cohorts. We did, businesses, the retail and the industrial sector. We also did both language and did seniors. We did youth, Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian, Creole, and
Yeah, the youth component was interesting. We actually hired high school kids to go out and survey the community. You know, so that was a way to engage young folks in the process by giving them a stake in the process. They were getting whatever paid to do it. And it really was effective because as opposed to me coming up to somebody in a church basement and saying, what's going on? When it's your friend's kid that does it, you get a lot more in return.
And what did you guys do with all the data and the feedback that you collected? Where did it go? What did you do with that information that helps them separate?
So that's the key thing. How do you distill all of this? How do you separate the wheat from the chaff? So if you do it long enough, you understand. So people that are just, I don't like my neighbor because he's got his garbage cans, you know, they never takes them in or whatever. Those sorts of comments come through these processes. It doesn't influence the decision-making process that you have to make with respect to policies. But there's always a kernel of something in those comments. So you have to take this process really seriously and you have to vet all of those comments and determine how they fit into the puzzle one way or another. And it's a skill. There's an ability to do that better or worse, but it's a challenge, Brad. And you get so much chaff to get to the wheat. It can be a challenge.
And keep in mind, right, it's the council that's ultimately responsible for adopting the comp plan. The council's not the one out doing all this outreach. So it's the consultant's job to gather all that intel, separate out what's really meaningful, and then convey that back to the council. And the council cared a lot about getting that information, having it publicly available, so that it was a very transparent process, and all the feedback from the community was known so that folks can see our voices were heard, right? We sat in council meetings. We want the survey results posted online to show the community that we listened, we heard them.
Transparency is really critical. So whether or not that person with the garbage with you expects to see that in the comprehensive plan, they expect to see their comments somewhere. Oh, Mr. Smith said something. There it is online. Hey, look, Bob, that's me. I'm online. That method of being transparent with the material that comes in so they can see it is really critical. So there's an IT component to the preparation of these plans, no question about it.
And the thing is, you can work those things into a comp plan in a different way. It's like you're not going to talk about like garbage pickup or dog poop pickup directly, but you know, we had the government efficiency sessions. Like, how do we improve government? And that's a big part of a comprehensive plan is, you know, effective government. So you can weave that without directly necessarily talking about that.
So that slide I showed earlier, that's the core concepts in the middle. So this slide shows sort of the components of the plan. So it has an introduction, it has that taking stock chapter, which is counting everything, measuring everything. So we have a starting point. Building a vision is going out to the community. It's that public outreach process that we're talking about now. And all of that goes, and then there's placemaking, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But all that sort of funnels itself into the core concepts of the plan. And in the case of Mount Vernon, these were the core concepts, and they're a little bit different. So if you look at the taking stock, that's the typical stuff you would expect to see: employment, housing, infrastructure. But the way the core concepts came out, it had this particular spin of the community. So instead of just transportation, it was safe and equitable mobility. Safety was a concern to folks. Healthy, safe, active neighborhood diversity and inclusion, instead of just housing. Resiliency, modern and reliable infrastructure. It was the spin of the community that created the impetus to address policy issues, which was unique in this particular instance. And finally was implementation. How do you get it done?
And all of this, folks, is captured in the draft comp plan. It's 100+ pages. That Pat was the primary author, right? If you want to check it out, the Mount Vernon website has a link to it. It was going to take too long to load up to show you this morning, but go check it out and you can see what the comp plan, what it looked like as it ultimately adopted. But from a process standpoint, after all this community outreach, distilling all the feedback, Pat working with James and the other consultants to prepare it. What's the next step in the process? Can the council just adopt it one night at a meeting, or does something else have to happen before the council can adopt it? Who knows? You have a draft, all the work goes into it. What's the next step in the process? Anyone?
Be adopted by the board, no?
It's got to be adopted. Before the board can adopt it, there's another procedural step that needs to take place. Secret definitely has to be run concurrently with the comp plan. We'll get to how the board handle that. Rule.
Thinking about the public hearing.
A public hearing, exactly, right? So a 50-person committee and the staff members compile the document. Once the document's ready, public review, there is a public hearing. Absolutely. And already there were three formal public hearings. And so,
Usually,
yeah, go ahead.
you said something interesting. You said every 5 years, a city by law has to have a.
It's recommended, it's encouraged.
So there's roughly 62 cities in New York State.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what percentage of those cities have a comprehensive plan? And also, a lot of these comprehensive plans are kicked off because of a big project coming in, right? And
That's
so
where the
you really
moratoriums come in as well.
What?
That's where the moratoriums come in as well, out of fear of
Yeah.
that big
Would like to
project.
go through two.
Yep.
And but I'm just curious how many comprehensive plans are really out?
So the default position with respect to that is all of your rules and regulations are your comprehensive plan. You don't have to have a book. It's the comprehensive plan, it's your zoning, it's your stormwater regulations. That's effectively your comprehensive plan if you don't have the comprehensive plan. But the formal comprehensive plan, most communities have it. The challenge is Mount Vernon's an example. When they did have one, they don't update it frequently enough. So in the state of New Jersey, there's a law that you have to update your comprehensive plan every year. So usually the city council will adopt a resolution that says nothing's changed, the plan's still. So they sort of bypass the necessity to prepare something, but the state is required. You gotta think about this. Every year you should think about this stuff. We have no similar provision, and as Bryce indicated, you indicated, it's typically driven by threat. Something's changed, or somebody has shown up on our doorstep that's got us. We've got to think about how we regulate stuff.
Yeah.
And just to show you, let's see what we quickly put up. We're going to misspeak and look at the actual language from the statute. So the periodic review, right? It's up on the screen. So the bond, so number 11, legislative body shall provide as a component maximum intervals at which the adopted plan shall be reviewed. So in my experience, most municipalities set an interval of 5 to 10 years. So the 5 to 10 year wasn't from the statute, but that's what most municipalities recommend in their comp plan going forward. As a practical matter, does it happen? Absolutely not. Right, municipalities that are either off their game or are visionary. I'm dealing with the town of Rhinebeck right now. There's on Route 9G up in Dutchess County, there's a lot of hospitality and agritourism uses that are being proposed. So Rhinebeck is saying, wait a second, slow down. Let's at least reimagine aspect of our comp plan. So it is oftentimes, as you mentioned, in reaction to development proposals and development pressures.
And there was a spurt because of COVID that changed everything. So there was a lot of communities that were forced to change their comprehensive plan. And again, for all of you practitioners who will soon be practitioners, the fact that the community has not adapted its comprehensive plan and you are somehow opposing what the community is doing, you have a basis to challenge them because they have an outdated comprehensive plan. Even though there's not a statutory period with which to do it, smart lawyers find leverage with respect to those sorts of things.
So we're going to take 3 minutes. You're going to hear a little bit from the mayor, a comment from a member of the public about single-family homes versus multifamily. That was a significant comment that came up from the public during the public process that we asked to briefly address. And then another member of the public. But so this is Mayor Patterson, as James mentioned, first female mayor in Mount Vernon ever, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is Mayor Patterson. She was hoping to be here today. She was scheduled to be here, but then ultimately had a conflict. So let's listen. This is the end of her testimony. The second public hearing. She came out because at the first public hearing there was so much opposition to the comp plan, so she came out to try to say, do a rah-rah type of speech. And this is towards the end. She's going to touch upon school kids and just the overall purpose of the comp plan.
I do support increasing density in strategic neighborhoods where it can support it. Our retail corridors, our high traffic zones, and our transit-oriented zones. These are places where density can work best, bringing a diversity of income, supporting local businesses, and creating opportunities for dining, recreation, cultural arts, and entertainment. These are the type of investments that will make Mount Vernon not just a place to live, but a destination. And then finally, we must also plan based on reality and data, not fear and rumor. For example, our school district enrollment has declined by 35% over the last 10 to 15 years. We went from 10,000 students down to about 6,500 students. Be clear, that is not because all of those families have decided to educate their children in charter schools or in private schools outside the city of Mount Vernon. All across the country, we are seeing a reduction in the number of children people are having in their families. birthing rates are decreasing across our country, especially in millennials and Gen X generations. I mean, not Gen X, Gen Z, I'm Gen X, Gen Z generations. And so these are national trends and we can't ignore them. We have to plan for them in the housing that we build, and understanding that as much as people said, oh, building is going to cause our schools to be overcrowded, our schools are not overcrowded. That's why 3 of them were closed.
Taking stock facts. You're arming the political officials with the data to refute the unsupported claims. Fact.
Envision Mount Vernon Comprehensive Plan is about setting a clear, responsible, and forward-thinking direction for the next 25 years, even though we'll update it every 5 to 10 years as necessary. It builds on our city's strength, addresses decades of deferred maintenance, and positions Mount Vernon for growth that is equitable, sustainable, intentional, but most importantly, responsible. Thank you very much.
This next speaker from the public is going to touch upon an issue regarding.
And now if we could hear from our planning commissioner.
Give me 1 second, folks. 3710.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Acting President Potteet.
No more, James.
that we could actually see the written word while it's being spoken, we would certainly appreciate that. Also, this is the city of homes. It's not the city of multi-unit dwellings.
City of homes.
And one family homes create neighborhoods with interest on their blocks, city politics, schools. Multifamily dwellings are detrimental to neighborhood interest. Now, creating
Multifamily dwellings are detrimental, right? I mean, another whole conference could be on the need for housing in New York and how that's accomplished through multifamily and not single family home, the typical large lot subdivisions. So from a policy standpoint, separate topic, but it was a comment that came up multiple times in the public hearings where folks like this gentleman read the draft comp plan to mean we want to encourage a whole lot of family and kind of do away with the traditional single family homes. These guys are going to explain in a second how they dealt with that comment, but this is just more for humor than anything else. But it kind of goes to the garbage pail comment on steroids. This next speaker, who, by the way, has a couple of different lawsuits filed against the mayor, against the city. So this is someone who, talk about the politically charged city, this is someone that is just opposed to everything that the city does. And let's see what he had to say for a couple seconds. 5340.
This isn't Envision Mount Vernon, it's the enshittification of Mount Vernon. It's a comprehensive failure dressed up as a visionary plan. It's a cut and paste parade of Ivy League planning buzzwords, right? Force fit into a city that they don't understand. There's no baseball field in Huntswood, okay? Fleetwood train station is like something out of the former Yugoslavia. It does not have a beautiful crosswalks and repaved. I've been in Bosnia and Herzegovina and been in better, nicer train stations. Not long after the war. So
Some people you wish may have stayed in Bosnia.
That's the kind of stuff that comes up in a comp plan process, obviously in all kinds of different land use processes. This is the kind of stuff that the council and the consultants are trying to balance. Okay, and talk about the single family home issue.
So I just wanted to bring out the one point. So people cherry pick plans, right? They're usually big documents. There's a lot of stuff embedded in them. And somebody will find one thing that they are opposed to and raise it. This is an example of one of those instances. So it's important to keep everything in context when people are opposed to a component. And he was speaking about crosswalks and so forth. There's a section about how to improve those, but he's somehow focused that their existing inadequacy is a problem. What we're trying to fix. The single family is really interesting. So this is a community that has a broad variety of housing opportunities, multifamily housing, all sorts of single family housing, 2 and 3 family housing. It's very diverse. But one of the recommendations, because this is a community in an area where there is a housing crisis, there was a generalized recommendation that what if you modify the accessory apartment or allowed duplexes in single family homes? This was viewed as, oh, now you're creating multifamily housing in single family zones. it wasn't what was being proposed, Ashira, and
No, Keith, finish your sentence. I just wanted to throw something in when you're done.
and that was the one thing Sue picked up on and decided to oppose it. It wasn't there was no proposed zoning to do that. It was an idea that could be considered to help address a housing crisis. And it was all of a sudden that was the meme on social media, and dozens and dozens of folks showed up to say you're eliminating our single family zoning.
Yeah, one thing I want to emphasize. One thing I want to emphasize is that Pat and I went back and forth about it. Like, do we have actual zoning recommendations? And Pat was like, don't do it, don't do it. I was like, we got to show something. We got to show something. So we came up with suggested zoning parameters. And within those parameters, it was like a generalized low density and gave like 2 or 3 examples of what low density could be. So they're just one of low density, allowed for like townhomes. And it's like, oh, you're allowing for townhomes? You're going to raise all single family homes to build because you're eliminating single family districts. So as Pat was saying, they cherry pick, they translate it, get folks like Mr. Thompson there to come out and be the bullhorn of discord.
Can I just add one thing?
Please.
I teach property law, and we just started our kind of unit on land use regulation. And I have a hype. Is Vincent here? No, maybe. There you are, right? And so Vincent owned a single family
That hand went
home
up really slow.
and wanted to replace it with a multifamily housing, and the class reacted kind of in the way that you would expect a public hearing to react. And I said to them, it's going to be the children in the public schools, right? And it's going to be, multifamily housing is going to ruin our single family neighborhood. And I'm so happy that you just showed that clip, because it completely illustrates what we see certainly on Long Island as well, kind of over and over in our hearings about multifamily housing.
And then you heard the mayor's comment, right, that the schools actually need students,
Right.
right? Any opponent to multifamily housing always raises or the school district card, that our schools are overpopulated, the schools can't afford it, we need new buildings. The data doesn't support it. School district enrollment is declining for some of the reasons the mayor talked about. So it's something the opposition uses, but it's to Pat's point about fact versus myth, it's often a myth.
But let's call some of those comments for what it is. A lot of the times, it's code. It's code because it's just like, oh, you're gonna build too much, and it's just like you're gonna, it's gonna be too dense, too many people, and it's just like not necessarily the amount of people.
It's those people.
Exactly.
That's the question.
Please.
Given your access to mass transit, does Mount Vernon has what we call my town, a TOD, a transit-oriented development zone, to allow density but close to transportation?
Let's talk about that for a second. So, we talk about this process. Very thrilled that we got to where we were, given the 2+ years and rough and tumble nature to get through it. Is that, was this the cleanest? Was this the most beautiful comprehensive plan, the way we approach it, doing it in the phased way? No, it would be ideal to do the entire thing, do the environmental, but financially strapped community that was skeptical. And so what we did to allow the downtown to develop is to allow zoning amendments, as Pat mentioned, along the way. Again, not the cleanest way to do it, but there was a framework that they essentially had to follow with the Downtown Vision Report, which was incorporated into the full comprehensive plan. And so what we have seen is that we told folks, focus on our train stations, focus on our train stations. So we have TOD1, as one zoning amendment of a few blocks. DTOD, the Downtown Transit Oriented Arts District. Grace Baptist Church, which is like, what do we call ours? Like, we'll call it TOD2. So it's like, it's getting into the vernacular. And, people are beginning to understand. It's like, oh, wait, you're not going to raise my neighborhood. You're just going to build some multifamily structures where there's a vacant parking, there's an underutilized parking lot.
2 points with respect to that. So to James' point, it wasn't the cleanest way to do it. It's never a clean way to do it. Like there's no community. I've done a lot of these. No community does it perfectly. It's always sort of cobbled together, and it's a whatever that community's unique perspective on life is. That's what you have to deal with. So
Pat, so after the comments were made, right, 2 public hearings, then staff, the consultants went back and revised the comp plan to respond to the public comments. It's not required, right? There were plenty of comments that got pushed off to the side, but any comments that resonated with the council came right back to us and said, what's all this chatter about we're destroying the single family homes? Let's go back and make sure there's language in the comp plan that puts those people at ease. So that was a major revision. There was also some other cleanup. And so, by the way, here's the Mount Vernon comp plan link. And you see red line revision summary. So then it got to a question. Well, the council could just hear the feedback, revise the comp plan as it chooses, and then proceed to adopt it. We had a couple of conversations with the council about, again, public transparency. Well, we're going to make some changes. Let's post it and have yet another public hearing. So that's what we did. So on the Mount Vernon website, the document was posted in a track change form. And there was a bunch of cleanup. But right up front, a sentence was added about preserving the integrity of single family neighborhoods. Does it necessarily please everyone? No, because they're really just out there to oppose anyway. But at least from a record purpose and having a document that reflects the public feedback, we went back, changed it, modified it, and then had a third public hearing based upon the track change version. And at that point, after 3 public hearings, the council closed the public hearing and then voted to approve the comp plan. And one of the key, at the end of the document, Pat, let's go back to the slide deck. Right after all the placemaking and all the community feedback, where is it? PowerPoint. Right at the end, there's an implementation chapter. Right, and the implementation chapter really sets forth the goals and recommendations for the next steps. Pat, why don't you briefly touch it?
So 2 quick things with respect to that. Brad mentioned a very important word a couple of seconds ago, the record. So whether it is a comprehensive plan, whether it's a specific project, the breadcrumbs you leave behind you matter. And that's the basis by which challenges will occur because there wasn't a clear record. So everything you do has to be documented in one way or another. So someone can follow those breadcrumbs to figure out why a decision was made. So the record, whether it's a comprehensive plan or a particular project, is imperative. And all of you will be foiling documents and going through records for projects that are voluminous with respect to challenges of supporting projects. And so the record matters. Implementation is usually where comprehensive plans fall short. So this comprehensive plan had hundreds of recommendations to give the elected officials, whether it's this body or the next body, a hand up on how they would implement these things. A simple matrix is a good tool at the end of the governance plan. There are dozens of pages. It identifies the broad goal, the implementation measure, what the boards would do. Is it a short-term thing, a long-term thing? Is it expensive or not expensive? And who's responsible for it? Is it the DPW or the city council or the planning board? So this is a roadmap on how you do stuff. What typically will happen is elected officials and councils will go through this and determine what's politically appropriate to do. They'll pick and choose. James and his guidance to his boards will say, we ought to be doing number 5, 7, 11 this month and something else next month. So an implementation section is really important. And if it's not there, that will be that dust covered plan that sits on James' desk and that nothing ever comes.
So quickly, it's just, how this is laid out, again, Pat was saying it's not always included. Narratives are great, but if you can't see exactly, what points to implement, then you'll never get to your destination. And so one thing I want to emphasize about a comp plan, it's a beginning, it's not an end. You look through a comp plan and it's just like, well, it doesn't touch upon this specifically or that specifically. It's not meant to. It's a vision. These are concepts. These are aspirations and goals to achieve for the next 10 years. The real work begins the day it's adopted. Keep that in mind.
I think with that, that's a really great closing remark. Let's take a break. We'll come back and wrap up comp plans and someone mentioned, I think you mentioned secret in the comp plan, right?
Yeah.
So we'll come back with that after break and then pivot to Glenn Clove.
So
You wanna-
two things. One, we have asked to turn the temperature down, so it should be getting cooler in here very, very shortly for everybody. And two, we've refreshed all of the food and refreshments. There's cookies and fruit and cake and cold water. So let's take a break and then we'll
10 minutes.
10-minute break.
Let's reconvene in 11.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to get started again with the second half of our program. And again, just to encourage people to raise their hands, there's a lot of people in here that came up during the break that have a lot of knowledge and interesting perspectives, and we welcome those comments during the program. So, is Brad in here? Oh,
I am here.
Okay. Without.
I just need to get my.
So we wanted to finish up Mount Vernon with a few final points to talk about. Number one, get with seeker. Number two was the next phase of this whole exercise, which was actually. Brad, do you want to talk about the neg deck, the seeker component?
Sure. Let's just do, I don't think we have a slide. Okay. So, just like any other land use approval, the adoption of a comp plan is an action for purposes of secret, right? So you need to comply with secret before the council can adopt the comp plan, right? I think for the students, right, the secret process has to be completed before any land use approval can be granted. The same goes for a comp plan. So there's two ways of going about this, right? The municipality can adopt just the comp plan as Mount Vernon did, and then shift to the zoning, which is what Mount Vernon is now doing, as James will talk about. Or alternatively, do the comp plan and the zoning all together. And which path you choose, I think, affects the secret review. When it was just a comp plan, as Mount Vernon did, it's a bunch of recommendations, right? Policy objectives and suggestions. Nothing is mandated. No new zoning was being adopted at the time of the comp plan. No development project was being approved as a result of the comp plan. So we got to the council through the negative declaration process. We adopted about a 25-page Part 3 expanded EAF document that demonstrated the council's hard look at the potential impacts emanating from the recommendations and objectives laid out in the comp plan. Typically, when zoning is done at the same time as a comp plan, a generic environmental impact statement process would take place, right, in lieu of the neg deck, right? So there's the POSDEC and the neg deck processes under SECRA. And so because, again, Mount Vernon did not do zoning at the same time, we did a neg deck, took a hard look at the impacts and the recommendations, and expanded Part 3 EAF, created the reasoned elaboration and the record for the secret determination.
But that neg deck did include fairly rigorous analyses of things like sewer and water and traffic and so forth. So it wasn't lip service to the analysis that needed to be done. It was done very thoroughly, but it was not the generic environmental impact statement. It was simply a neg deck, but it was a thorough neg deck.
And that's common practice. But now, as James mentioned, the next step, right, the real work, as you said, is the day after the comp plan gets adopted. So tell us about that.
So Pat and I mentioned that there have been a number of zoning amendments, about a half a dozen already that have been done or in the works since the comp plan was adopted back in November. So again, not the cleanest way to do it. The reason was because, there is a cost concern. Doing a zoning ordinance is much more expensive. Going through SECRA, doing a full GEIS, FEIS process is a lot more expensive than just doing the comprehensive plan in of itself. And so we've spread this out over a number of years. We were able to solve the issue of allowing development by focusing on the downtown vision report. And now, with the full comp plan adopted, there's a framework, but it's still just a framework. Even though we passed through SECRA with the long form environmental assessment form, there was a lot of, chatter. Why didn't you do a full EIS? That's kind of cheating. Well, not really. It's like we complied with SECRA. And number two, the city was like, in the meanwhile, until we figure this out the way we want, do the zoning ordinance the right way, developers have to do their own SECRA anyway. So we'll leverage that. They're following our comprehensive plan while developing. So when we do a full GEIS, we already have a lot of that data. A lot of developers did it for us.
That's a dirty little secret when you have a fish on the line, asking them to expand the traffic study, a few more intersections. They may fuss about it, but they'll do it at the end of the day. We're doing that in the context that information is being used, not necessarily for broader planning initiatives. So it's a little bit, but it also, at the end of the day, that developer wants to make their way through the process, so they'll eventually.
It's a little different than the way I'm did most of my work in New York City. So it's just like doing multi-block rezonings or, a dime a dozen. Here it was just like, why would I look beyond my site? Why do I care about the impacts of my project beyond my site? It's like this is good planning. This is, how you should utilize the zoning ordinance. So now with what, Pat and I had put together in terms of the suggested recommended zoning parameters, we're gonna, go back into community, do another outreach process because people are still afraid. It's like, okay, we have this plan, but like, are you really gonna, build multifamily housing next to my one, little Tudor cottage, with a 1/4 acre land? It's just like, no, that's why we're coming to you because we need to get a little more detail with the zoning ordinance. We're going to do the full EIS. We're going to study those impacts that, you said should, quote unquote, should have been done during the process. But the vision is there. It's again, now's the real work. Now's the real work to say, we want this. Parking is a big issue. I'm sure it's a big issue here too, but it's like we have to right size the parking as well because, there's too much parking for a 4 square mile municipality, and it doesn't necessarily the locations don't necessarily serve the needs of of the uh of the city.
James, elaborate upon that, right? Because it goes back to your question earlier about TOD developments. Talk about municipalities everywhere are looking at their parking requirements, especially in light of the transit options. And the whole goal is let's reduce the parking, let's reduce impervious, reduce stormwater, and rely upon sustainable options of transportation.
Yeah, the zoning, the way we zone in a lot of ways is, in terms of parking, is like to take account of that guy over there. I know he's buying cars for his kids, and so I don't want you to take up spots. And so it's just like make sure that he has like 3 or 4 spots for his one family house. So, when people come visit me, they have a place to park in front of my house. It's like, that's great. But in terms of reality, that's expensive. You can't get things done. You can't get projects done. It takes up a lot of land. You say, okay, let's do some smaller multifamily units. We don't want too much density, so let's do something a little smaller, like 3 or 4 stories. Okay, but you're requiring a 12-unit building to have 2 parking spaces per unit. If all those 12 units are 1 bedrooms, what do you need 2 parking? What do you need 2 cars? That's 24 spaces for a 3-story building.
A 3-story building that's 30 steps from a train station.
Yeah. And so what happens? I'm not gonna provide all this space. The only way I can do is I need to dig. I'm not gonna dig. That's gonna increase my cost. Well, what about payment in lieu of parking? And so like, oh, you're charging me $10,000 a space? Wait, how many hundreds of thousands of dollars now do I need to pay because I don't meet these egregious parking requirements? And so these are the kind of things we're going to look at. We're not getting, we're not getting rid of single family zoning. We're not getting rid of parking because we need parking. And so we need to right size it. Those, more, low rise, bucolic, large lots, single family neighborhoods. Yes, I get it. You're not near a train station. You need 2 spaces per house. Sure, that's fine. But if we're talking about even smaller density, we got to right size it. We got to make sure that these are developable projects. It's not like a gift to the developer. It's, a lot of these units we're targeting towards younger folks. We are an aging community. We're an aging community with aging homes. And so, grandma's there, it's just kind of like grandpa moved on a long time ago. We all moved out. The kids moved out. Does she need that 5-bedroom, 2-bath house? It's like, no, it's for the next, but build a senior development, right next. She's not going to be driving, but she'd like to be able to jump on the bus, the train to go somewhere.
The parking issues we have a session on with respect to the same question about it. James is an urbanist. He comes from New York City. And in many ways, he's tilting at windmills because he's in a suburban community. So it's a lot of folks saying, no, I want my extra cars. I want that. Oh, it's the shopkeeper saying, I want to park in front of my store instead of in the municipal lot around the corner. So there's a lot of tension with respect to this particular issue. And that's why that was separated out from the comprehensive to the zoning.
And we need to keep our younger folks, a lot of y'all, folks want things to do. They want to be able to walk to a nice restaurant, bar, to be able to go to a CVS to do something and not like have to jump in my car and find parking because they lowered the parking ratios. But it's, we're not even talking about affordable housing. It's, young professionals are just looking for something, to do in a certain lifestyle. It's, a lot of working from home, create up more work from home scenarios, and where it's just like, I don't need to commute except for my own pleasure. And it's just like, yeah, I'll save up to buy a car, but maybe I'd rather save up to buy a home. And home looks different. There's not necessarily a single family because prices in this region, DC, San Francisco, are out of reach for a lot of younger folks. So why can't I just buy a one-bedroom condo? Why is that not a reality? And whereas we're better to build that right next to a train station because it's an opportunity. You can save up, and then 10 years from now, if you want to do something different, single family home or a home, like a detached home somewhere, by all means.
By the way, James made it to a suburban community today via mass transit, so it's a possibility. You don't always need the car.
It is possible with a cab, but
So to bring it back and concluding this segment to the law, right? So everything that James and also not going to do in terms of adopting zoning, again, it ties back to zoning now needs to be in conformance with the comprehensive plan that was just adopted, right? So again, the comp plan now lays out the vision, the zoning implements the comp plan. Something that sort of a curious aspect of law in New York, the opposite isn't true, right? Now that he adopted the comp plan, the council did, the council could put it on the shelf and let it sit. The council's not mandated to do anything with the comp plan. A lot of times developer clients come to me and say, Brad, comp plan in so-and-so municipality recommends something. I have a great proposal, require rezoning. Let's go and submit a zoning petition. It's consistent with the comp plan. Under New York law, the legislative body has full discretion to say, nah, not interested. Not now. I just got elected. I don't want to deal with it. Too big. I got something else going on. There's other projects in the pipeline. Too much density coming on at once. Unlike a planning board that has to process a site plan subdivision application that gets submitted, a legislative body does not need to accept a zoning petition for processing. Doesn't even need to vote on it. And developer clients would say, well, the comp plan recommends it. What do you mean they don't have to take my application? Bottom line is the law doesn't require it. There's such wide legislative discretion for adopting and amending zoning. So you go through this whole process, and then whether this council, again, a change in administration, they could take this comp plan, put it on the shelf, and do nothing. That's not going to happen here, but I want to point out that kind of, I think, unfortunate aspect of New York law, right? That a developer cannot then submit a petition and require a legislative body to process a zoning change as long as it's consistent with the comp plan. So that's another policy discussion. Maybe the courts can correct one day. But for now, James and Mount Vernon will be considering zoning. Again, they don't have to follow all 10 pages of that matrix. They're going to pick and choose and prioritize what they want to focus on first. And then over time, over years, can implement the comp plan.
I actually have to get going, so I apologize if folks had questions, but you can shoot me an email. Just tell me that you were at this session at JRAUSSE at mountVernonNY.gov.
Yes, we can all find you on the website.
I know, but just thank you for having me. I got to go actually teach a class at Columbia right now, but you're in good hands here, and they're bringing it back to the island. So,
So we're going to pivot. Brad, you want to hit that clicker?
Yes, and let's just shut up James' microphone.
Where do you go?
James, you walked out your mic?
Yeah, it's there.
Right there. This is it?
Yeah. So we're gonna pivot. So Mount Vernon was an example of comprehensive plan, broad scale municipal planning, lots of engagement and so forth. We're gonna pivot now to a specific development project. And that is, push the button, Brad.
We're just looking at everything we forgot to talk about.
We forgot. So we're talking about a project known as Garbage Point. It's in the city of Glen Cove on the waterfront. So if you remember the very first slide that I showed this morning, talked about persistence and perseverance and how these things take a long time. So the comprehensive plan in Mount Vernon took 50 years before, from the last plan to this plan, getting it adopted. The city of Mount Vernon started thinking about Garbage Point. I think the first waterfront plan was in the mid-1990s, when there was actually a redevelopment plan that was done for this particular area. So for 40 years, where the city of Glen Cove has been thinking about its water. Sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth between cities. I apologize. So since the city's been thinking about this, so context again, city of Glen Cove, one of the two cities in Nassau County, about 30,000 in population, 6.7. The area that we're talking about today was the industrial portion of the city, and that industrial use, which was been there for hundreds of years, left a legacy. There's no question about it. So
Here's Glen Cove today.
Glen Cove today, a lovely community, and this is the area that we're talking about, which is that waterfront area along Glen Cove Creek. The center picture is the old starch works that used to be there. So there were traditional industries and there were more modern industries. The contamination that exists on that property is radioactive waste in some instances. There were some really, it was a seriously contaminated site. And it's interesting, this is an example of a project that's so complex because it has so many layers of administrative and governmental engagement and involvement. So this is the area that Brad just brought up. Glen Cove Creek is right in the middle. And that industrial legacy left brownfields and left Superfund sites on this property. Interesting distinction between those two programs. Brownfields are when somebody wants to remediate their property and do something, they get help with doing that. Superfund is when the government comes in and says, I don't care what you want to do, you have a problem and we're going to fix it. This is an area that had both.
And these sites were both DEC, right, that's New York State, and EPA Superfund sites. The sort of the so here, the clicker. The site is 56 acres. All right, here's Glen Cove Road, Garbage Point Road, I'm sorry. I come to the middle, here's Glen Cove Creek. The right side of the property is the former Lee Tungsten facility, and the left side known as Captain's Cove. So Lee Tungsten was all like metal manufacturing. Captain's Cove was basically a large industrial waste dump. And that goes back to the late 1800s and the early parts of the 1900s and mid 1900s. And then Glen Cove Creek and Hempstead Harbor was used for trucking to bring a lot of that waste to the sites.
Just downtown, Brad, is just to the right. City Hall is right. It's adjacent to the downtown.
So the industry stops in like the 1970s, 1980s, and Pat started giving you some methodology. To come to the end, $100 million more of federal funding, state funding, clean up the site. And we could get a little more into like the cleanup standards, right? But it's cleaned up to a point to allow residential reuse of the property. And it doesn't mean it's pristine, right? One of the aspects of environmental remediation is that you can clean it up to a point to allow then safe occupancy for different types of uses. And you do that with certain controls in place. There's called engineering controls, institutional controls. An institutional control, for example, is like you can't use groundwater for your drinking source. Engineering controls are more physical, right? Vapor barriers underneath the buildings that prevent vapors from contaminated groundwater and soil from entering the building.
And the important piece of that conversation is that it cleans up the sites to a degree, to a point. To get it to where it's useful property, somebody else has to step in and finish the job. So municipalities generally don't have the resources or funding to do that. Typically, it's a developer that would come in to redevelop these properties that have been identified. And this is an instance where the city had identified these as high priority redevelopment properties for decades. So the city said, we ought to redevelop this area. It's changed from what it used to be, but it's really a mess. So that mess has to get fixed out.
And just to give you a quick chrono, and I gotta look at my notes, I can't do this part from memory, right? But, so as far back as 1996, the Glen Cove Creek Revitalization Plan, that was in essence like the comp plan, master plan for this area of the city. A couple of years later, Glen Cove adopts MW3 Marine Waterfront zoning that allows a mix of uses down in this area. An RFP goes out for proposals in the early 2000s. Glen Isle Development is the name of the entity that the city partnered with early on, and an LDA called the Land Disposition Agreement was entered into. This project is known as a public-private partnership. The Glen Cove IDA CDA owned 52 of the 56 acres. The other 4 acres is for another day, right? But owned most of the site. And so the IDA CDA Industrial Development Agency, Community Development Agency, entered into an agreement with the selected developer to acquire the sites, just like any other real estate deal, subject to a whole bunch of conditions. One of the key conditions being subject to receipt of all land use approvals, right, to build the project that developer wanted to build. There was all of the kind of other stuff about what public amenities need to get built, who's responsible for infrastructure, who's responsible for the ongoing environmental cleanup and long-term maintenance. So this LDA, 75 pages and amended multiple times over the years. Rosemary.
I must say that most of the environmental remediation was done by the federal government and the city of Glen Cove, IDA and CDA, with funds for the state, and not by the developer. The developer did end use controls.
Correct.
You know, just for the people to know that the developer would not have gone into that property. They had to condemn it from the state of Maryland. It was very messy.
There's a whole history, right? And so
How did Glen Cove get ownership?
I'll talk to you about it offline. We don't have it until now.
And so federal and state funding cleaned it up, right? All to incentivize development. When the private developer came in, there's ongoing remedial requirements. There's monitoring. There was some further endpoint sample. Like there's stuff that happens post the major part of the cleanup. But she's right? Over $100 million of state and federal monies and city to clean up these sites to get them ready for redevelopment and to revitalize this waterfront area.
Also, the legacy of the property, there was never going to be an arm's length transition between the municipality and these projects. This history of funkiness on the property, which is why the city had to step up and condemn the properties and use eminent domain to take them over. The city said, we're going to be the grown up in the room, and we're going to take charge of this process, regardless of whether you want to be a good steward or not. We don't care. We're taking it over.
And so the short version of the story, so an LDA gets entered into in 2003. And one major rule of thumb in these kind of projects, multi-phase projects, 56 acres, they take years to develop and they evolve over time. So I'll truncate the story, right? Between like 2003, 2008, even the zoning changes, it facilitates more multifamily. There's an economic downturn in 2007, so different ideas, change for the project. The project stalls for a couple of years during the economic downturn, and then in 2008, RXR, local Long Island developer, becomes part of the partnership on the private side. RXR comes in, has some of its own visions, right? There was formerly a hotel. A hotel was still considered, ultimately went away. So these projects evolve over time as new private parties come into play, as administrations change.
And in response to the assessments of the projects and the sites. So there were environmental issues and site development constraints that caused modifications to plans. The more the city learned about it, the more the developers learned about it. So there's no question these projects are complex and they evolve over a long period of time.
And on the environmental, right, to cut to the chase on that, obviously no building permit until EPA, DEC, County Health will give their final approvals. We can get into that a little bit, but obviously the sites would not have been developed if the agencies having jurisdiction from the environmental standpoint didn't give their final blessing. the role of the Glen Cove Planning Board, right, as the local lead agency under SECR for the redevelopment project, was to make sure that the planning board understood all those environmental issues, looked at them, understood what was still remaining, what were the long-term maintenance and monitoring requirements that were imposed by EPA and DEC. But it wasn't like the planning board's job to make sure that the mercury was remediated to a certain level. That's the job of the oversight of those other agencies, again, EPA, DEC. So in 2011, Economy is back, RXR is at the table, and a full SECR review is underway. The SECR did start back as far as 2004, but like I said, there were some starts and stops. And in 2009, a final environmental impact statement was submitted. There were public hearings. In 2011, the project gets revised again to change like the rental mix, and there were some other changes to different aspects. A revised final environmental impact statement was submitted. And in the fall of 2011, there's public hearings on the FEIS. So again, a full-blown SECR studying the overall site, which led to a finding statement in December of 2011. And so with the adoption of the finding statement by the planning board, that ended the SECR review. But of course, the story doesn't stop there, right? A couple of years later, in 2015, new administration, new mayor gets elected. New mayor wants to have his imprint on the project. And one of the things the mayor introduced at the time, there were originally in 2011, on the west side of the project, there were 4 buildings that were approved on the west side here. And so there's a thought, well, let's consolidate the 4 into 2 buildings and create a new park in the middle to have more open space and green space. So in 2000, so the development team agreed, like the idea, project gets revised and has to go back to the planning board for review. And so then the question becomes, is a supplemental environmental impact statement required? Do you want to jump in here or should I keep going? Keep going. So with a project change, right, the lead agency is then obligated to decide, are the changes material enough to warrant a supplemental environmental impact statement?
There's nothing in the statute that sets forth that criteria. It's a judgment of the lead agency, basically.
Yeah. And it's based upon the same standards, right? You have to take a hard look at the impacts. And was there anything new that's going to present a new adverse significant impact that wasn't either previously studied or studied now as part of this amended application in 2015? The planning board concluded that a supplemental impact statement was not required. And we'll get into some of what followed after that. But just take, let's go back to the deck pad. So here's the 2015, the amended plan.
And the site was broken up into, I think, 7 what they called blocks. Each one of those had a separate independent site plan. It was relative to that block. Greg can point.
Let's say for a second, right? So the way the zoning works in this district, it's a PUD, a planned unit development. So the MW3 zoning that was adopted for this area of the city, it's a 2-step process, right? Typically, you want a site plan application, subdivision, you go in for your smaller site, plan board processes. It's a 1-step process. You go in for your site plan or subdivision. In a PUD zoning, typically, it's a 2-step process. The first step is a PUD master plan for the overall site, right? What's the conceptual build out? What are the heights? Where are the buildings going? Where are the public amenities? And you conduct SECR on that PUD master plan. Once the PUD master plan is approved, then the developer applicant can come in for individual site plan and subdivision applications on each individual phase or block of the project. What that allows is SECR review to be conducted, conceptual level. You're not spending a gazillion dollars on what size is my stormwater pipe and what planting height is my deciduous tree going to be planted at. That all gets fleshed out further during site plan. So you get PUD approval for the overall, individual site plan subdivision reviews for each individual block. So in 2015, with the change of the project, the applicant came back in for amended PUD approval.
So that's important to bear in mind. So that what the PUD master plan did was create the framework of the project. Future site plans live within that box, you're good to go. There was an amendment, so we had to reevaluate the box because it was a different plan that had different impacts.
This is where the question of whether an SEIS was required or not, given the full secret review that had transpired between 2004 and the findings in 2011. Total footnote, my son was born in November of 2011. For all the law students, I remember going home that night and working on the statement and the chairman like thanking me right the night. So the project, just to show you, the part closest to downtown for connectivity, this is a arts and cultural center. There's an amphitheater, there's a boardwalk over a wetland area, so there's like a public amenity down the far east side. This marina support building is relevant in about 10 minutes. There's a building to support the local marina. There's some showers, a place to buy some sunscreen, and a place for the boaters to kind of just get some supplies, right? Service parking, blocks H and I, 2 rental buildings, blocks G and F, 2 affordable workforce unit. Again, as a kind of a footnote, we could debate whether it's a smart planning concept or not to have the affordables kind of broken out in their own building, or should it be interspersed throughout buildings throughout the project? There's been some changing philosophies in where you integrate and how you integrate affordable housing within a project. In Garvey's, they're standalone separate buildings. This was an office building that, because of COVID and times, still is not constructed, and that's sort of changing what that use is going to be for. Renaissance Park, a park on the east side of the project. We spent a whole night at the planning board one evening discussing what type of playground equipment was going to go in that park. The applicant's architect was wanted to bring this sort of fancy playground equipment somewhere in Europe, but I don't remember. It's built. If you go out to the site now, that playground equipment is there. It's metal. It's really, really hot. So after spending an entire night in this cool cutting-edge playground equipment, the kids were complaining after it went in that it was uncomfortable. And so ultimately some shade structures and stuff, but it just shows you like even like that level of detail that you think you spend so much time talking about, in practice it gets built and we got a problem that we got to correct out in the field. So just I'll never forget that night, 3 hours on playground equipment. There's an Esplanade throughout the entire site. There's an Anglers Club, a private membership boating club that is on the site that got relocated as part of the project. Here's another marina support building on the west side of the project. And now, rather than having the 4 buildings on the west side, the same amount of units got broken into 2 separate buildings. And these are for sale condo, building B, and then building A, right in Hempstead Harbor. There was some wetlands restoration work in here. There's an ecology pier where students or obviously the public can just come out and as you walk along and use the parks, come out and have a boardwalk over the wetlands. So much the planning board and the city focused on was the public amenities, right? This is again it's a mixed use public-private partnership. Wonderful that the private applicant gets their vertical development, but for the city, the parks, the Esplanade, the ecology pier, a restored boardwalk, and a beach at the far west side, that was all really important to make sure that's kind of what the city was getting, right? In addition to the revitalized area and the tax rate.
And all of which surrounds a ferry terminal, which the city built in the middle of the project.
And that ferry terminal, if you follow Newsday, is still not operating to the best that I know. That was built with money that the Obama administration had granted back in like 2008, 2009. And the ferry has had its own story. It's a gorgeous building, and what comes of it, I guess we'll see. But it's there, and I guess the ferry is an evolving story. So the planning board in 2015 spent like 6 months evaluating this change to the project, right? And the chore wasn't go all the way back in time and look at the project fresh. It's a narrow review. What changed, and do those changes require supplemental environmental impact statement? So let me say this slide just I guess illustrates the different public amenities. There's some retail components as well. There's a bagel shop there now, I know, on the east side. You see the two parks right now, so in addition to Renaissance Park on the east side, you have a new park on the west side.
A little bit of context about the public utilities. When the RFP was issued, the city made it very clear. These are the goodies we want, Mr. Developer, so if you probably building all of these. So the city was intentional and purposeful on what it wanted out of the end of the day. Of course, that became negotiations as these projects made their way through the process, and we started fussing about the type of playground furniture that goes in the park.
So during, so this slide, let's go back to the. So one of the major considerations for the planning board during the amendment review process was visual, right? Because now we were taking a building that previously was oriented this way across the creek and facing the village of Seacliff across the water, was now reoriented facing Hempstead Harbor, alongside the building now facing this side of the creek as opposed to being oriented differently. And what was proposed is a 12-story tower all the way on the far west side.
And this is an interesting conversation because it relates to visual impacts. When you start talking about visual impacts, things get subjective to a certain degree. The interesting thing about this property is it used to have very large industrial buildings on it. Those buildings went away and it was flat open space. So the context was, what are we comparing the project to? The crappy old industrial buildings that were there for 100 years or open fields, you know? So that's an interesting conversation. There's no right or wrong answer to that, but it's something you need to bear in mind when you start thinking about how to evaluate visual impacts.
Yep. And so during the process, we're now in like summer of 2015, the planning board required the developer to adjust the building on Block A. So 3 major changes: reduce the height from 12 stories down to 11. This northern wing at one point was much closer to the beach and the harbor, so it was pushed back about 50 to 60 feet with more landscaping and a restored beachfront area. And also, it may be tough to tell from where, but the building steps back on the upper floor. So from an architectural standpoint, stepping floors back on a building help create sort of visual corridors and help break up the massing of a taller building. So that was important to the planning board, and the project was on its way to having the PUD special permit amendment approved in October of 2015. At the very last public hearing, several residents from Glen Cove came out. The village of Seacliff also came out, expressing some serious concerns about the project, about the amendment, about the visual impacts, mostly on this building A and how it was situated. Folks across from Seacliff, I think their chief issue was, well, we used to be looking at the shorter end of the building. Now it's all, rather than 4 smaller buildings, it's all, desert to one taller, and we're facing the longer side, so everything from noise and lighting. And Seacliff came out that October. The mayor came out, they submitted written comments. And so now, towards the end of the process, the planning board considered all those comments for purposes of creating a strong administrative record, and the approval resolution literally responded to all of Seacliff's comments one by one in the resolution. So the practical point there, as a land use practitioner, creating a record is critical. In the event of Article 78 litigation, it's not customary that you see an approval respond point by point to public comments, but given that it was a neighboring municipality and they had lawyered up, so we had anticipated Article 78, but we had addressed each of the points in the resolution. It does get adopted, and then litigation ensues over the next couple of years, there were 2 different lawsuits, one by the village of Seacliff and one by residents of Cove. And the main allegation was an SEIS should have been prepared to get the changes in the project. Environmental issues was also a major part of the lawsuit.
So I just want to touch on a point with respect to what a developer, someone who has a stake in the project, can do. So when you look, if you've never been, first off, go take a look. It's pretty cool. It's going up. Much of it has been there for a while. It's an interesting place to visit. There's a brewery on the property, so
go, I'm gonna get to the brewery before we end today.
So, a developer, when they spend the money to do something like this, there's a pro forma. They figure out what's into it, what it's gonna cost, can I make money on this project? And that's based on what they have to do to develop their property or develop the property. In this particular instance, if you can stand aside for a second, Brad, the big chunk of land that we're talking about that had that most criticism with respect to federal impacts is right next to the Garvey's Point Preserve, a beautiful visual resource. It's on the waterfront, a beautiful visual resource. So logical planner's instinct is, well, just move it away from there. Remember, this is a site that's so environmentally constrained. If you moved it anywhere else, there is no anywhere else. The ability to manipulate a site that's constrained environmentally for a lot of different reasons gets challenging, right? So the option is, well, do less, right? At the end of the day, the developer's gonna say, I can't do less because I spent this for the month, for the property. Now the pro forma gets tricky, right? It's stuck from his perspective, dollars and cents. So it would have been nice to say, just get out of there. Getting it out of there was a challenge. It really was not a practical solution for a developer, for RXR, that wanted to make a buck at the end of the day. So I just wanted to give that context. When you look at it, yeah, sure, move it. Moving it's not that simple sometimes.
So, to Article 78, and again, views and environmental through the key issues. Since I thought it'd be. So this was something that the developer had submitted during the review process that summer, right? So this was in the administrative record, right? Studying visual impacts. And in our class, we always talk about like what materials comprise the administrative record. And so everything from traffic studies and stormwater reports and utility reports, right? And so visual analyses are another area of impact that an applicant is required to study, and a planning board as lead agency should make them study. And these kinds of visual tools are used by a board to take a hard look at the potential impacts. And so what you see here is, Pat mentioned earlier, you just compare to the existing condition, not the old industrial, but what exists out today. The middle rectangle is what was currently approved, and then the bottom was what was proposed. So this is a view from Hempstead Harbor looking east into the project site. And Pat, you mentioned earlier, it's subjective, right? I could probably pull the room and half of you might think the middle slide looks better and some may think the bottom slide looks better. But the standard in an Article 68 is not what the judge thinks looks better. It's did the planning board take a hard look, right? The judge's role is not to second guess the lead agency's decision making. It's just to make sure that the hard look was taken. And the fact that visual analyses like this slide and the next one, this is now taken from the exact same vantage point in Seacliff looking north across the creek. The fact that the planning board considered the impacts was sufficient for the court to uphold the decision. It went on appeal. The appellate court upheld the lower court. In your reading materials is both the Article 78 decisions from the lower court as well as the appellate court. So, the way, fortunately, Article 78 is an appeals work in New York, like 3-4 years later, you finally get to the end of the litigation process, and the planning board's 2015 amended approval was upheld. RXR had continued to build even during the litigation. There is certainly some risk there. That's a topic for a different day. But the project didn't just stall as a result of the litigation, which in many projects that's what lawsuit developer, a lender may say, faucets closed, that thing until the litigation is resolved. For a variety of reasons, this project continued to progress even during litigation, knowing that there was a risk if the litigation came out differently, that would have been an issue, but that's not what ultimately happened. And so in the end, the project is now, it's largely built. Things slowed down during COVID. There's still certain issues that are being addressed, but if you go down and visit the site, there's plenty there to see. This is now Block B. This was one of the condo buildings on the west side of the project, right, Pat? Here's new Esplanade that was installed, landscaping, the lighting fixtures you can see here, and those got a lot of attention as with the lighting fixtures. The whole idea was to create a marina, a waterfront type feel. So again, many nights at the planning board, reviewing and scrutinizing what are all the different fixtures, like the benches, the lounge chairs. Remember those conversations? Let's stay here for a second. We have 6 minutes.
Now you talk.
Maybe we'll do a trip right after this.
The Irish game.
Let's see if I can quickly pull this up. Right there, see an image. So Pat, this was it. All right, so Ledoux Leatherworks was one of the old industrial buildings on this site, right, back in the mid-1900s. So that marina support building that I mentioned, again, as the project evolves, the city, the developer wanted a way to help activate the east side of the project. And so the thought was, rather than this small marina building, let's convert that into a brewery restaurant. The brewery was already operating on the north side of Garbage Point Road. And so it was in 2019, 2020, I think it was right before COVID, there was a change from the marina building to this brewery. And the brick and the architecture and the design was intended to mimic or at least reflect the historical feel of that old Ledoux Leatherworks building. So just a interesting tidbit from the project and the thought that goes into the design. And you might ask, should the planning board be concerned about what the exterior of the building looks like? Is that more architectural review board? Different conversation, right? But this planning board cared very much. If we're going to convert the marina to a brewery, what's it going to look like? And they wanted to capture the old feel of this level.
Can I add something to that? At some point early on, back in the late 90s, instead of forming an architectural review board in the city of Glen Cove, the decision was made that the planning board
Yes,
to do our architectural review. So you don't have to have a separate board.
correct.
Just make that to the planning board.
And Metro Planning was assume that responsibility.
Yeah.
It's challenging because they have to shift hats a lot of times between.
Long meetings.
Long meetings is absolutely right. But in this case, the city of the city of Glen Cove's planning board was so invested in the public amenities associated with the project. What was the community getting out of this? Not just RXR, that things like a brewery building, many hours were spent making sure it had a historical context to the old Leatherworks building that was on the property as well. So I think the proof's in the pudding. Again, go take a look. So a lot of those public amenities are a significant benefit, and it was another significant issue that went all the way back to the 90s, which is this is the waterfront. It's always been over there. It was never really part of the downtown or the heart of the community. So the objective of the city from way back was to create connections so that you could walk along the waterfront all the way to downtown to City Hall and back and forth along the waterfront, creating that connectivity. So now you've got not an enclave, but something that's connected to the city. And that was intentional. It was done as part of this. When you have PUD master development plans, you're able to craft that sort of context for these types of projects. So net beneficial for everybody.
Well, let's talk about the environmental, because it came up in the litigation, and there were a lot of issues came up in this litigation, but in this, one of the chief allegations was that the environmental was still ongoing, and the planning board didn't take a hard look at the environmental. And the petitioners raised and submitted their ongoing reporting requirements when you have these formerly contaminated sites. So the petitioners found online these reports submitted to EPA and DEC, some of which still identified some remediation hotspots with some further testing, or you need to do another groundwater monitoring. And so they were arguing that there's just stuff, right? The site's not really clean and ready for development. The city's argument, which prevailed, is that that's not how cleanup of these former contaminated sites work, right? And if you always had to open up secret every time something was found going forward, these projects would never get built. There are site management plans that get reported against these properties, environmental easements get recorded. These redevelopment efforts contemplate that stuff may come up in the future. So as you're building, if you encounter something, site management plan instructs you what to do in that instance. It doesn't mean you go back and rewind and undo the secret process all over again. If there was something that was found that wasn't known, there was no way to deal with it, then you may need to go back and take another hard look at the secret. But for anything that was disclosed and contemplated and there's a game plan to deal with it. So again, site management plan, environmental easement, the court ruled in the city's favor that the plan did its job and took a hard look at those impacts. There's a case in your materials called Bronx Committee, which goes the other way. There was a school campus in the Bronx where approvals got overturned because the long-term monitoring and maintenance wasn't secured during the secret process, and we were able to distinguish Bronx Committee in our litigation. So again, that's in your research.
And if the approving agency is savvy enough, you build into the process the recognition of those potential which I'm sure Art Santa would have a fuss about if we talked about it today, but the premium on their stormwater management controls and so forth. Extraordinary because just in case, we made sure that they went above and beyond in anticipation that there might be some funky stuff that hasn't yet been uncovered. So a lot of that premium was built into a project like this. I think they were sophisticated enough to understand that that might be the case, and it turned out to be the case.
Questions?
Who got stuck holding the bill for the litigation? The city of Glen Cove, the developer, how did that work?
So the way that works is the developer pays for that.
So wait, just a point with respect to that, why when you're building that record and you're telling the developer, let's go back and redo that traffic study, they're usually gonna say, okay, we'll fill up your escrow account to do that additional study, because they know they're building a defensible record. It's not just us showing off, we're smarter than you and we want you to do these extra studies. This is a thorough record.
And the escrow, but I was just going to touch upon that, right? During the land use process, there's an escrow set up for the private applicants to fund that's used to pay for the municipality's outside consultants. And opposition likes to always say, well, you're being paid by the developer anyway, but that's just how the process works. And so that carries over even post-approval into litigation. A developer-funded escrow pay for the litigation costs. And by the way, the developer not only pays the municipal consultants' costs, they're still paying their own lawyers and their own consultants. So the developers pay both sides of the litigation.
The civic associations and the pay also is the opposition.
So correct. The petitioners who are bringing the lawsuit, they need to pay their own. They're funding their own litigation. And look, if you're going to oppose a project, and eventually the lawsuit, consultants have your own attorney. There's you have to still create the record on the opposition side, because if you want to argue to a court that put in your own visual analyses, put in your own traffic studies, demonstrating that the applicants and the planning board studies were inaccurate. So
and oftentimes that claim will be brought in a manner that says, if we're damaged, developer, you got to pay all of our costs, pay for us as well. So that's the potential outcome of a successful opposition lawsuit.
we good?
Lunch time.
Thank you everybody for attending. If you're getting CLE for lawyers in the room, you just sign out on your way out.
Yeah.